see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Unites people. Armies, gold, flags, stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it.
If you want to stand out from everybody else, you need to get into storytelling.
Draw a different frame around the same set of circumstances and new pathways come into view.
Welcome to ARTEFACTLive with me, Scott MacArthur, where we look at the art and science of story. We don't care who you are, whether you're a bricklayer, a professor or a speaker, all we care about is you being a good storyteller.
Thank God the drummers arrived.
It's time to realise that facts tell, but it's stories that sell.
Get me some nasty and get it now or someone's getting shot.
And that's a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche. 1,000 comments.
Selling a hemorrhoid cream to someone who's got hemorrhoids.
Got a whip.
I was born into a deep contradiction.
This stuff's magic.
Oh, that's so clever.
Good afternoon and welcome to episode 59 of ARTEFACTLive with me, Scott MacArthur, where we look at the art and science of storytelling. Episode 59. Blinking heck. I don't know how I got there. Anyway, welcome to the show, folks. Nice to see you all here again. Got a really interesting one for you today. But before I go into that, I'd just like to remind you a couple of things we do on the show or offer on the show that might be a bit different to other podcasts and vlogs that you tune into. One of the things I'm really keen to push in 2022 is to get my community involved in these shows. And to do that, if you've tuned in before, you'll have heard me talking about open all cams. Well, it's a bit like what they do in comedy, open all mics. If you want to come on the show, just let me know in the chat or DM me on any one of the platforms. I will see it and I'll send you a wee link and you can actually come on and ask me and my guest Mike any questions that you like. I really want to encourage you to do that this year because one of the things that I enjoy personally, and I know a lot of my clients enjoy, is the interaction part. And despite things moving in the right direction, we're still not getting enough of that in our lives. So have a go on ARTEFACTLive. Come and have a chat with us. No question too big, no question too little. Just don't swear. Right, that's the only thing you're not allowed to do. Right, so this week is about one of my favourite topics. Now, there are three things that I focus on in my writing and in my speaking. They're what I call disruptive technologies. These are technologies that are growing at an exponential rate. And if you don't know what that means, you can ask me later and I'll send you a video that explains what exponential means, because very few people actually understand the maths, but it's quite simple. But the three technologies there's nanotechnology, there's biotechnology, which didn't used to be in the media a lot, but since COVID's come along, it's in there a little bit more. But the final one is AI and robotics and automation. And to talk about that today, I've got a pal of mine. Now, I've known this guy, Mike Hobday is his name. I've known Mike I know Mike's listening. I don't know, Mike, it could be quite scary to work it out. 20 years. But Mike and I did a few jobs together, and one of the particular jobs we did was the job that got me around the world at least 2 or 3 times. So Mike's got a special place in my heart because of that. So I hope you enjoy this. Mike's got a good sense of humour and he's a very good storyteller. So ladies and gentlemen, if I could just introduce you to Mike Hobday, the CEO of AntWorks. Mike, welcome.
Hi, Scott. My God, it's not 20 years, is it?
I think it must be. I left that big monster that we worked at 11 years ago, mate. So it must be.
That was a fabulous project. That was.
Wasn't it great? Yeah. I was saying to Mike earlier, folks, that was the project that got me onto the Great Wall of China, got me onto the Empire State Building, and it got me, the top of the Eiffel Tower, Mike, and it really, literally got me everywhere. And a baseball game in Canada, it was amazing, and they were paying us for it, mate.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I was the one who sold the job, and you were the one who got the fun.
I got the fun, yeah. Nah, I'll never forget it. It was an extraordinary experience. It really was.
Yeah,
So,
it was good. It was good times.
yeah,
And they
absolutely.
continue. But really good to be here, Scott.
It's a pleasure to have you. I know I've been trying to get you on for ages. You're too bloody important to come onto my show, young man.
I'm not important, but I am busy.
So let everybody know what it is you do. Well, maybe give a potted history of your background, and then we'll go on to talk about storytelling.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. I'm very fortunate. You know, when I look at my LinkedIn profile and go through it, and I can't believe I've done all these jobs. But I started life in the previous century, working for Barclays Bank, and I actually joined as a cashier, a little branch called Kings Norton, straight from school.
Gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, there you go. There's so much more to me than meets the eye. I'm the only clerk who actually managed to lock all of the staff outside of the bank.
Did you?
When fire alarms went off.
Oh, no.
I had to do I was fire officer. Everyone was steered out the branch, and like a studious kind of 19-year-old, I locked the bank. And then the bank manager said, "How are we going to get back in?" and he refused to. He said, "I can't ring head office and tell them we've all locked out, so you're going to have to break in." So I think I'm probably the only person that's been told by a bank manager that you've got to break into his own branch. Excellent. So from humble beginnings. So and then I was lucky enough to get on a development scheme, and I ended up as head of operational strategy for Barclays. Again, just before the close of the last century, and then leapt and went into consulting, which is the path that led me to you, and went through PwC in strategy consulting, and then went to Prudential, did some insurance transformation director there, and then where I met you was at Atos, KPMG then, and had a couple of years CEO there, and then IBM. Running banking in the UK, banking in Asia, traveling the world, not in quite the same style that you did, I suspect.
Of course not.
But then, funnily enough, ended up towards the end of that, instead of running banking, getting into AI and then robotics, head of automation for Europe, general manager for automation in Europe. And then leapt out and decided that at the tail end of my career, I really wanted to transform myself. So instead of working for an organization of 400,000, I'd joined an organization of 200. And so now I run AntWorks. Get that right.
I'll keep you right.
Yeah, which is all about RPA, robotic process automation, but more importantly, intelligent document processing, which is how you use AI to read documents and all that kind of stuff. So very exciting, fabulous time, and still enjoying the life of work.
Good. Now that leads me to the sort of the reason why I think it's important to have you on, Mike. Take away the background, but this is important because of all the technologies that I described earlier. I think AI and automation is still the one that scares people. People still worried about it. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about all sorts of Terminator scenarios and all the nonsense. And one of the things that I believe we don't do enough, and you've heard me say this many times, but it's basically that if you change the story you're telling people, you change the perception, and if you change the perception, you can change the bloody world, And for me, and I know you share this because I know the artifact you're bringing on today, which really hits us in the head. But what is it about the line of work you're in just now that you think is the bit that's causing all this grief? Because there is a fair bit of grief and fear of it. What do you think about that?
Well, I think again, the word automation means different things to different people, and artificial intelligence. These are all terms that are created by people who are aiming to look really smart, I think, without and they're sort of conveyed almost to support this idea that people who know about these things get paid a lot, and if you don't know very much, then you're excluded, and it creates this barrier.
Yes.
And it also means that people are fearful, and also the deployment and the benefits you can get from the technology. People miss out on it because they're deploying it in the wrong way or thinking about it in the wrong way. So
Yes.
I'm a big fan of, partly hides my poor knowledge of technology, I suspect. But the reality is, I like to simplify things, which is why I'm really pleased to come here and talk about stories, because people need to. Stories are the way of breaking down that fear, and that's certainly a way that I go about selling the ideas of AntWorks and selling the ideas of kind of transformation in organizations, which has always been very important to me.
Yes.
So kind of like, let's just explore. Should we just explore a couple of those terms?
Please.
AI. So simplistically, right? I take the view that artificial intelligence can do broadly two things. In a world where there's lots of data, the human mind is still much faster and much more effective than, quotes, artificial intelligence. But what AI is able to do, and how, with the advent of, data lakes and cloud, is there are vast pools of this data around, and artificial intelligence and other advanced analytics skills can be used to find new patterns in the data. And the whole thing about technology is that it can sift through data and find patterns of data, patterns in the data, in a way in which humans can't consume data fast enough to create the pool. So and the fearful thing is what decisions, what patterns, what knowledge is being extracted, and obviously there's fears of how that technology, those algorithms are being manipulated and or in some cases imbued with the biases of the people who are building the programs.
Can I just interrupt you, Mike? Sorry to interrupt you. Just explain what's an algorithm from a technologist perspective.
When I was at school, they didn't have algorithms; they had equations.
Yeah, me too.
A plus B equals C. Kind of like at its simplest, right?
Yeah.
So that in simple terms is, if this is true and that's true, then this may be true. Is the kind of thing that artificial intelligence is looking at, or it's looking at, if these four things are true, then X is going to happen. So what happens is if B changes, does that change? And artificial intelligence starts to look at the patterns and look at response and learning techniques to use machine learning to allow the technology or the algorithms to evolve with changing circumstances. All very nice, right? But it's all really emulating in many ways how we think. It's just able to do it at a bigger scale. Now, that's wonderful, because that can create whole new services and insights that allow organizations to grow, and new services that we might receive that we'll benefit from. Autonomous vehicles and how they interact with each other is an example of that. There are benefits and disbenefits of that. But that's the kind of like the AI of data, right? And that's where I think there are rightly fears, but huge opportunities. And then there's the other bit of AI, which is the place where I work, where I'm less concerned about it, and I think it's got a huge opportunity, and it's almost like the bridge to the world of this kind of smarter planet environment. And that's using AI to support us in the way in which we interact with the analog world. So by the analog world, I talk about how I'm conveying messages to you, or I might get on the phone or on in a chat environment, and I'm typing free form to a chat bot, as we would know, or some sort of answer machine, which is a call and response, and basically that's turning speech into text, analyzing the text, understanding what you're inferring in your conversation, your needs, and providing an automated response to you, the world of the chatbot. And then the world I operate in, which is more about intelligent document processing, which is able to take a contract or an invoice, and it's programmed to emulate how humans look at a document. I recognize what this document is. I recognize what it is. I know what data I'm looking for, and using AI algorithms to find inferences in contracts, for example, about when the contract starts and finishes, or
Yeah.
if it's an insurance contract, is this covered or not? And for me, is where I'm spending my time, because you can't believe, everyone thinks we're in a paperless society. The only thing is paper's been converted into images of documents, and someone still has to read them.
Yes. And in that world, I mean, if I was a paralegal, or if I was a insurance clerk, or even you when you were a banking clerk, I would be thinking, my granny used to say, you're on a sugarly nail there, because obviously, I mean, a paralegal's job is to review the literature, and, good technology is going to do it quicker, better, deeper, faster, everything, so how do you square that with your clients, or is that something I know you'll have an opinion on it, but do you sell as the concept of the digital worker, like, some companies in your space call it, where, they basically sell scripts, or how do you deal with those? Because this is really exciting on one hand, but it's terrifying on the other.
Well, I think there are, two parts of the story. One is, in most industries, we're in a growth environment. The amount of paper, the amount of communication is increasing, right? Yeah. So the volumes of documents that have to be read and reviewed is getting bigger, not smaller. And so, and the other part of it is that what we're really doing is taking away the routine. So if you're a paralegal and you're spending a lot of time reading documents to find out who are the parties to the contract, what are the demands or requirements of the contract on particular parties, that sort of stuff. Actually, you're probably having to read a 50-page document to extract 40 key pieces of information or insight, right? Okay. Well, actually, if you didn't have to read it, that actually, our system, or a system like ours, intelligent document processing, actually extracts those 40 items and presents them to you, and then you can go, right, I want to check on this item, right? And it takes you to exactly the point in the contract or the paragraph that's concerned, right? It really is taking the routine rubbish, right, of and allowing people who are highly trained, not to speed read a document poorly to find the 40 pieces of information, but do that work for them. So people will be able to do more work, and their work will be more interesting because they're focusing on making a decision or executing a transaction on the information that's been extracted, rather than having to go through the
donkey work
reading. And then robotic process automation, which you also mentioned, or robots in this context, really are taking that data and automating the keying in that paralegal might have done into the system of record, or some sort of web application or something. Okay. So actually, I'm quite positive about it, because I think the dull stuff goes. So as long as we're in an environment where the economy is growing, then actually jobs should become more interesting and engaging.
Yes. Okay. One of the areas that's helpful. Thanks, Mike. One of the areas that I'm super excited about in this space isn't in the document world; it's in the biological world. Because just in the last 6 months, we've basically had our first cure for major diseases that was worked out by an AI, because there's a thing in biology called tertiary models, which is all about, when you hear about a molecule, it's got a three-dimensional shape. And a lot of us junior scientists used to spend bloody months trying to work out, using all sorts of different microscopical techniques, what the shape of the molecule was. The famous one being the double helix of DNA, of course. But now they've deployed some of these little AIs just to work out families of molecules, and that has opened up a whole new industry in biology. So that's the way one of the ways I describe it. And indeed, one of our viewers, Derek here, he's kind of asked that question, because he said, pattern recognition is potentially a great way of removing hierarchies in organizations. How would you convince people that this is a good idea if carried out automatically? I mean, I think you've gone some way to answer that, but if you get any other...
So that's interesting. So I can't remember the name of the company. I'll have to look it up and we'll post it. But there's a company on the West Coast that has no hierarchy at all, and basically they look at the relationships. So they I mean, I don't know whether you're really allowed to do this in a kind of like a, in this world of great concern over privacy, but the idea is that everyone's interaction with anyone else in the organization is known.
Yes.
And so the nodes are found, and so you can see who the people who are interacting most with others around particular problems, right? So number one, you can see who your valuable people are in the organization. And it's an organization, I think, of about 400 or 500 people. But the beauty of it, though, is because so it's all about outcomes and how the organization works as a system in a biological kind of way, which is really interesting. But the great thing, though, is about pay, because what happens is at the end of the year, they have a voting system where they have all this data about who's been interacting with whom, and all of that is available, and people are asked to value themselves, and so they value what they think they should be paid in the coming year, and everybody votes. and you'll get people who might undervalue their contribution, where other employees think, no, this person should be paid a lot more. And so that's a really interesting idea, I think, of I don't know how it would work in many organizations, it's such a change, but the idea that a corporate can also be a biological entity. Yes.
I mean, the one I know of is that one, AG Biome, who do some of the work I was talking about. They don't have they have a node structure like you described, platform structure. But the way I kind of hark back, quite often I find, Mike, that, we've been there before, and we worked in consulting, didn't we? And one of the things that happens in consulting, maybe the ultimate power may well be with the partner, who isn't necessarily always very bright, but they're good at selling stuff. That's the reality of the partner community, a bunch of most of them. But if you were the expert, if you were the the technologist who really understood SAP or Oracle, you would largely be in charge of that project, even though you're subordinate to that partner, because that partner wouldn't dare take you on in your knowledge. And that certainly was one of the things I liked about big consulting, Mike. And I guess that we might see a bit more. You get it in the military to a lesser extent as well, but yeah, it's exciting that I
think what you're getting at there is in that consulting environment, it's about people as well as the technology. So you might have somebody, and I would argue this. I've got some fantastic people. In fact, everyone's fantastic, but there are some fantastic architects, technologists at AntWorks. I mean, they know vastly. I mean, they know vastly more than I do.
Yes.
But in any system, we all rely on each other to be really good at our jobs and do our part, right? My job is to run the company, with all of that entails from an administration and shareholder perspective and all the corporate governance and sales and everything, right? Whereas somebody is actually responsible for my product and the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, or the other components of the solution, or the IT function that looks after the infrastructure that supports the whole thing. So I can't tell some of these guys technically what to do, but my job is to make sure they work together effectively as a team. And I think what you're alluding to is in those days, and also true today, is you've got somebody who actually owns the story, right? Keeping it on story. And so when I was, doing more selling in that sort of environment, then I owned the story with the client. Actually, what have we agreed? What are the outcomes you're trying to achieve? And my project may only be a small part of that, which actually the guy who's the expert in the SAP component of that program might not be aware of or necessarily skilled at telling. So, and I think that role of partner was relationship and the story about why this piece of work is going on.
Right. Put your future glasses on, Mike, for a sec. Where do you think this is going? I mean, you have insight into the product design. You're not always going to be doing customer work, are you? You're going to have guys looking at, or you'll be aware of people looking at, the next 5 years. And the horizons are collapsing, aren't they? I mean, they are becoming very much shorter. Where do you think this stuff is going in the medium term?
Can I do my artifact? Because I think that plays a bit to it. Should we do that bit?
To do the artifact? Yeah, okay. Yeah, no problem at all.
Is that okay?
Oh, he's caught me off guard, right? So
Well,
this,
no, sorry, I didn't realise there was a specific time.
It was my favorite thing in the entire world.
now, I love this. Wait, let me just put you on full screen. Well, I don't need to actually. What is your artifact? What's the artifact you brought along?
Artifacts. So when I used to in the physical world, when I used to do more projects, more speaks, I'd often get, and this is where it's something I started when I was at IBM, and I've continued where I am now. Right, is get people to think about their jobs. Let's do this. Right, it's probably not a good one. Let's try this one.
Yeah,
and basically, I'd give people a card like this. And they would think about their work. And what I said was, here's a blank, human shape, and then you can see them there. There's some real artists out there, aren't there? And I said, start at the bottom and think about your whole. If the shape of the body is 100% of your time, don't think about your job, but just think about how much time you spend keying in stuff on a keyboard. And put that line above the feet, as high up the body as it might take. Maybe 20% of your time is spent keying in, right? And then the line above that, write that where you spend time reading stuff.
Yes.
In a bit like we've discussed. And then a line above that, which means that, this is the time you're spending sharing information with colleagues or customers, which is information they should be able to get without having to come to you, right? And then above that, is a time that's really about creating value, decision making, time with clients that's value creating. And what you find is your average person is up to their knees in keying in, up to their elbows in reading documents, and up to their necks in having conversations which are a bit pointless. And then literally when you get people to think like that, perhaps only 20% of their time is spent actually doing really value-adding work. And I think if we all reflect, we would find it, and it's different at different stages of time. And I did this exercise with the board of one of the top 4 law firms in the UK, actually a global law firm. And of course, there's a senior partners that said, well, we're really important. We only do really important stuff, right? I said, no, well, let's just think about, right? How much time do you spend on a keyboard? How much time do you spend reading stuff that the paralegals have brought into you? How many times do you find yourself you're telling the paralegal something that they should already know, right? Or should be able to look up? And yes, the balance was different. Obviously, they created a lot of time. They're probably up elbow above, whereas actually valuable time. But the reason why I think this is important is we get too focused on artificial intelligence, robots, on Internet of Things, biotech, all of this stuff, right? Which are the enablers of change. But people are really focused on, and we were talking about a little bit earlier, really, about the future of work and what the nature of future jobs looks like. So, I mean, if you for most, but not all, I think Alien is probably the one that's not like that. But most other visionary films have people talking to computers. They didn't have them keying in stuff, right?
Oh, that's right.
And the technologies I've talked about, which are are coming, and they're here now, right? Reading documents.
Yes.
The chat bots that can answer basic questions. Doesn't that mean that all the stuff that was up to your elbows or up to your neck actually can largely be automated away? So therefore, the future of work should be about the routine being stripped out.
Yes.
And people can start working on the decision making and thinking and being innovative. Hopefully, actually having some more time to do the things that they want to do. So that's my optimistic view of the future. And then, of course, there's all the other stuff, which is in a way kind of peripheral, because it's about the environment around you, which is automated. So autonomous cars, smart houses, all of that stuff, which is you can feel it. And that thing's moving so fast that we can just futurize that the data we need, information about the state of our homes, even when we're not in it, is there for us. But the crux of it is about creating a better life, I think. That's what I encourage people to think about when
I like that, Mike.
Transformation.
I mean, there's one example, if I could add to what you've just said, that a friend of mine's involved in a company in London, and he, I met him. We did a TEDx thing together in Telford. Or, I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, it was. I'm sure it was.
Telford, by the way, anybody in from Telford?
Well, don't go there. Anyway, but his idea. He was a surgeon, and he wanted to try and use this idea to save people's lives. It was very direct. I'm going to save people's lives. And all he did, I mean, it's so simple, but all he did was he got the database of everyone who's trained to do cardiac resuscitation, CPR. And he got a little app designed, and I'm probably playing that. It was quite complicated to make. Yeah. We get a little app in London for all the people in London that are CPR trained. And whenever someone had a heart attack, a lot of them were little monitors. So if anyone had a heart attack, that monitor would ping the person closest to them who was CPR trained.
Wow.
What a brilliant. I mean, he said to me recently.
Simple ideas, right? Oh. They're actually the most powerful.
Yeah. Well, he reckoned even on his pilot, you can imagine he's been treated like a king at the moment by companies, particularly in America. But he reckoned in his first year of the pilot, he saved 400 lives in London.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus wept, So
it's purpose, isn't it? It's about jobs with purpose. There was something similar, not as simple as that, but nonetheless quite beautiful, was the idea that, and it comes back to the bigger AI, the big data, right? So there was a principle, and it's obviously evolved since then. But I remember going to New York to look at what we were doing with Watson way back. It's 4 or 5 years ago now. So I talk conceptually. I don't know where it is now, but the idea was you could create a base of knowledge. Corpus of knowledge, which was updated from new papers about diseases, which could be consumed, in a way in which doctors and surgeons could never keep up with the level of publishing. And basically, what this said was, in the case, I think the use case or story that was used to demonstrate it was a child in a hospital who was seriously ill, and basically into this environment they plugged in all the symptoms, and basically as more symptoms emerged, basically using AI to look at the patterns of symptoms and focus on potential diseases or conditions, and as more and more observations of the child evolved, it narrowed down until it came down to Kawasaki disease, which is quite rare, and there's no reason why somebody in the hospital would necessarily recognize it. And those are fabulous things which are really about, not about the treatment as such and the observational stuff, which it's difficult for machines to do, but open up a great opportunity for wherever you are, in whatever environment, to have that knowledge of the knowledge of disease focusing on you, and some of the uses of, for example, machine vision on cancer of the skin and blemishes and changing the blemishes have proved to be very successful too. So very excited about the future. I think it makes knowledge more available, more readily accessible to everyone who's able to use it. Yes.
Fingers crossed we keep going in the right direction, because it is really amazing. Thank you. When we were preparing for this, you sent me a couple of pictures. Now, you did, and I need to ask you, what is this all about? Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs. Yeah.
Great picture. Great.
I love pictures, but it comes back to this kind of like telling stories, right? Yes. So I think I was quoted as long ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, in the Telegraph. Yeah. And I said my job in AI and robotics is really to make dinosaurs run faster. And that got me on the front page, and otherwise what would have been a kind of very much a middle page of the newspaper. And and the reason I said that was the way in which a lot of technology is applied is driven by cost and a tactical solution, or occasionally by executives or senior people who want to be seen to be trialing a technology and not being transformational with it. And my observation was that, is a lot of technology is being applied to 20th century processes. If you look at most large enterprises, the processes they have run have now have some technology and some ERP involved and all the rest of it, right? But are fundamentally the same process that's been operated since those organizations set up. That would be certainly true in banking, for example.
Yes.
And my observation was something like robotics, which basically emulates how humans move data from one place to another because the systems aren't integrated or wired together, is an example of making the data move faster, but not changing the process. So my observation was, in a world which is being, and is being transformed, and, particularly in startups and smaller, new startups, whether you consider Facebook, to be a startup, or a new generation company, and there are ones being invented as we speak. Those organizations start with a blank sheet of paper, right? But the way in which technology is being deployed in the largest organizations, in my observation, are really about making those organizations more efficient. So the dinosaur runs faster, but the extinction event that's coming, which is, whether it's blockchain, IoT, or whatever, edge computing, whatever it is, it's very difficult for these large organizations to transform. So they go from being a brontosaurus to a velociraptor, perhaps. But none of the humans are coming, and then the other analogy I use is about the risk that people are using these new technologies to drive efficiency, and in many ways, a bit like the Egyptians, they're embalming their 20th century processes and not thinking about what's the customer trying to achieve, how can I use technologies to rethink. And in my own area with AntWorks, if you can use our technology to extract data from contracts, for example, 300-page contract, insurance contracts, for example, and you have a human doing the quality control to make sure that if there's an exception, that it's looked at and all that stuff. If you can get to 96% accuracy, let's say, then and so you're confident that your data at the front, as it enters an organization, is good quality, then you might rethink the way in which your processes are configured downstream, and your processes might be completely different, because you'll know from your consulting environment how many processes in an organization about reconciliation, because nobody's quite sure whether this data is right or not. and so this kind of this idea of embalming 20th century processes, I think, is also coming back to this idea of stories. It's getting people to stop and think, what are they actually doing with what they think is transformational, because it's often not transformational. It might be good at taking some cost out.
Yeah, and it usually leaves the old system, the legacy system, still having a role. And
exactly.
Very good. Okay, I'm going to ask you to talk about your favourite story in a second, but before I do that, Derek seems to be enjoying this. He's given us a few. There's a couple of funny ones here. He said, just to quote you, Derek, thank you for tuning in. A paperless society is about as likely as a paperless bathroom.
Well, 50 years. Long after I've gone. But
I visited Hadrian's Wall last week. I think I mentioned it to you, and we were looking at how they used to go to the bathroom, and they didn't have paper; they had sponges that they reused. Oh, it was horrible. Horrible. It really was. It was absolutely disgusting. Anyway, sorry, I've never
in the COVID world. I don't understand.
Boiler or something. Yeah, horrible. And then the other thing Derek said here is, I hold my head in my hands when I see the number of organizations working with IoT and blockchain who are simply making things faster, but not providing a better solution. They're making dinosaurs run. Yeah.
The wrong answer quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that. Now we're going to do in a sec. We're going to have Mike's quite wonderful story that he'd like to talk to us about. But just while I'm playing this little stinger, have a think if there's any questions for Mike and stick them in the chat, and we'll have a go answering them. So here's Mike's story. Now, the other thing that Mike and I have a passion for, and I think it's probably all-consuming for both of us, it is music. Mike, tell us about your particular artifact that you've brought today.
Okay. Well, I've chosen this. There we go. There we are.
Yeah.
So I ought to say, kind of like my passion for music knows no bounds. So on the 13th of May, 1978, I saw Elvis Costello for the first time at a really ropey bar in Birmingham called Barbarella's. And it was transformational. I mean, kind of like, and ever since then, through his 32 albums, I've collected every one. And I'm the founder of a Facebook page with about, not as many as your Apollo one, but about 4,500 people on it, dedicated to Elvis Costello and the artwork that went around, all of his music. But but Scott said you can't talk about every song from Pump It Up to his latest album. So he said I got a select song. So I chose a song from this album, which is Punch the Clock, which is 1984, I think. Yes. I'll be in a lot of trouble if I get it wrong.
Yeah, I was going to say.
and I've chosen the song Shipbuilding, and I don't know whether you're going to play a bit of it. Shall I do the story? Yeah, we go.
You can talk. We've got to watch copyright, but I wanted to have it in the background while you speak about
it.
So
Shipbuilding is a really interesting story because it's a beautiful melody. Now, the melody was written by a guy called Mike Hobday, who turned up at a party. It's a Nick Lowe's people into music will know. And Elvis Costello was there, and he says to Elvis Costello, "I've written this really good melody." And Elvis says, "Well, what's that?" He said, he's invited to go out to the car parked outside, and they get a tape. In the old days, they had tape decks in cars, and played this melody. And Elvis said, "Okay, I'll write the music." And then a couple of days later, Elvis rings Clive Langer and says, "I think I've written the best song best lyrics I've ever written." Yes. And that was the song that you've just heard, which is an absolutely beautiful melody, and they wrote it with a guy called Robert Wyatt in mind, and it was actually released by Robert Wyatt.
Yes.
Initially, and Robert Wyatt was the drummer of Scotland. There he is, and he fell out of the window, and for a large part of his life has been in a wheelchair. So. His attempt at featuring on Top of the Pops was, I'm not sure it ever happened because for technical reasons, but he was due to be the first guy in a wheelchair on Top of the Pops. But the story, I think, is important because at one level you can go, it's a beautiful piece of music.
It is. And
on the second level, it's got a story, and the story is really interesting in my mind, and that is about the Falklands War. So when they talk about shipbuilding, they talk about the ships, whether they were British ships or Argentinian ships being sunk, and how particularly for the UK, people living in the north of England who worked in shipyards, might have their sons and daughters fighting on these ships, in that case in Falklands, but there is a loss of those ships meant there was more work in Newcastle and the shipyards. But the lyrics around, where you could be diving for dear life when you could be diving for pearls, I think are just beautiful. So I recommend it to everyone. And David Bowie had it his top 10 singles of all time. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah, I'm passionate about it.
It's a glorious song, and it's one that I confessed the other day I'd heard of it, but I hadn't really listened to it properly for best part of 20 years. And do you know the Glasgow connection?
Oh no, can't tell me. Apart from that, Elvis plays at Apollo.
Yeah, but the Glasgow connection is that on the Robert Wyatt version of this beautiful song, they commissioned or they took some art from a very famous artist, and this is the art here.
Oh,
and,
yes, that's on the single.
That's right, and it's the Glasgow shipyards.
Oh, well, there you are.
Yeah,
See,
and
I learned something I didn't know.
Yeah, so Stanley Spencer painted this, and the other thing, I mean, the actual painting, Mike, is in Glasgow at the moment. It's actually in Glasgow at one of the art galleries at this very moment. And my grandfather,
you and I are going to have to go.
Yeah, we should, because
we should.
I'm slightly surprised you didn't know that, but it actually proves a big point. No, this is great because it proves a point, because artifacts like that, that's a piece of music, world-class music, world-class lyrics, world-class musicians performing on it. And if you've not, you should hear the trumpet solo. My God. Yeah, it is beautiful.
A quick story about Chet Baker. So Elvis recording the song, and he hears Chet Baker's playing at what's the jazz club in Soho? Anyway, the Ronnie Scott's.
Yeah.
So he goes down to watch Ronnie Scott's, and at the bar afterwards, because Chet was a good drinker, I asked him if he'd come down to the studio and play on it. And so Chet just says yes, and Elvis says, how much will it cost, right? And Chet says scale, and Chet Baker is probably one of the greatest trumpeters of all time. Scale is nothing, right? So Elvis says, well, we'll do double scale then. and Chet went down, and it was one take, and it's beautiful, really beautiful.
It actually jumps out, doesn't it, in that particular video? It's just beautiful. Yeah. So there's a couple of things supplementary to that, but I guess I see we're running short of time now, but going full circle, and I see one of the troublemakers we used to work with has just come in and asked a cheeky question. I'll come back to that in a minute. But in terms of full circle, a lot of the technology, I know that's not specifically what you're working on, but I know a lot of the technology is being deployed in the music industry now. You know, you got your the basic stuff like the voice correction technology and the clap beats and all the rest of it. But have you heard? Have you got around to listening to any of the pop songs or the classical music that AIs have written?
Oh yes, I have. And, I mean, what can you say? I mean, I like your post on LinkedIn actually, which is related, which is kind of like with all of the technology of even composers are writing things on on Word or something like that. But actually, if you look back, and I think I posted Paul McCartney's Penny Lane kind of handwritten notes and all the corrections, all of that disappears in the way in which documents were created, unless of course they've got it on track change, but really carry quite the same.
I don't think, like I said it on LinkedIn, Mike, I don't think they'll be fighting over previous versions of Word documents. I think it's going to
no, exactly right.
But so there's a couple of questions here that one of them's a cheeky, so I'll get it out of the way first. This is a man we both used to work with, Simon Teal. Hello, Simon. How are you? Mike's far superior to Scott's. Now, Simon, everyone's music taste is their own, and it's all good for them. That's all I'll say to that. But at least I listen to more than one band. Anyway, move on quickly. Simon's asked a good question here. How might Mike's current business have helped him in his previous roles? Oh, that's a good question, Simon. Thank you. What are you doing now that could have helped you in your previous roles? I'm just going to sit back and watch this.
Are you asking Simon or are you asking me?
I'm asking you. Well, I can answer it as well. But
no. Okay. Well,
you're the guest.
I mean, the point at a generic level, right? Yeah. Every process, and Simon, has worked in transformation from all sorts of angles through his career. And I know he's been working. He's got his own company, I think, these days. I think he's over in Stratford upon Avon.
He's a neighbour, basically. He works at Felber.
Okay, I won't tell him. No, he's not there at all. Anyway, so but the whole thing about technology is it comes back to this idea of not embalming your processes. The opportunity to look at a process or a business and think about how data enters the organization and how all that routine work is conducted. You know, absolutely, you know, you can, you know, that is being taken away, that opportunity to transform, and its implications for the design of jobs and for the design of work, you know, creates a project which is way beyond a simple technology deployment. So that absolutely, I think the specifically within a consulting environment, you know, the generation of contracts, for example, it used to take ages. You know, the reading of emails coming in, you know, our emails from clients, and therefore, you know, so there's any job, every job now has the scope over the next kind of 10, 15 years to be transformed or actually removed and new ones created.
Yes.
There you go.
And also, there are, and I would imagine Simon already knows this because he's brilliant at this stuff, but the bid process, I've seen some AIs now working in the bid process.
Yeah.
You know, so it's meaning that the consultants can be more creative rather than being bogged down in those bloody awful contracts, bids we used to have to write for those big deals, Mike, if you remember.
I've seen some organizations starting to use it for you know, the RFI, request for information, or request for proposal processes, those big, you know, which often give rise, particularly in the public sector, to massive documents. So yeah, I mean, I think again, those processes are very boring, and if you can remove the tedium from them, but ideally, I think the whole RFI, RFP process should be transformed completely anyway, because far too much work goes into them. And I think, but anyway, there you go.
And the final, and Andy over on Twitch has just said, well, why don't we have NFTs of lyric sheets? NFTs are non-fungible technologies, which that's not a bad idea, actually.
Well, I don't know where these NFTs are going. I saw Currency by Damien Hirst.
Yes,
you know, that's an interesting one to look at. You know, so
So brilliant, Mike.
Live in.
I can only echo what Derek's just said. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I could listen to you for hours as well. That's been magic. I knew it would be. If there's anything I haven't asked you, is there something else that you? I mean, there's one other picture actually, Mike. I'm going to do it because you're still here.
Where's that one? I can't remember.
This one. What's that about?
Oh God, that's a little while ago. So this is I can't remember. Is it Sophie? I can't remember her name now, but she's I'm standing next to. She was one of the very first, you know, humani robots or humani bots. Actually very impressive. Actually, what was really interesting about that was the guy who was actually looking after her came to, it's actually the conference, when he was adjusting her clothes and things. I was really uncomfortable. And it's that close to being
really.
I felt I'm not entirely. It's really weird. I know, you know.
Yes.
We'll probably leave that one.
Yeah, probably. Although, no, we will leave it. Yeah, yeah. Like,
open up another consciousness.
One of the best things about lockdown has been that you and I have managed to rekindle our friendship, and it's been fantastic. And I think I mean, Andy, the guy who I make the Apollo show with, is on just now. Andy, we need to have this guy on talking about Elvis Costello and music memorabilia, and it's Bubbles, isn't it? Bubbles is your man.
Yeah, Barney Bubbles.
Yeah, we need to get him on and talk about that because it's absolutely fantastic. So, Mike, thanks very much for tuning in and all the last weeks. Also being a guest. It's been fantastic. So I'll let Mike go, and then I'll just say a few words before we finish up, everybody. Thanks, Mike. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye. So I think that is one of the best examples of where, you know, stories taking on the hard stuff. It's not just about, you know, writing fairy tales or whatever. These are all important things, but Mike's work is about taking on the hard stuff. And next week's show is going to be about that as well. And I'm going to actually do it on my own for a change, because I thought, given I've just had my 12th anniversary as being self-employed and running my own company, I thought I'd talk about storytelling in the context of setting up your own business, because there's an awful lot in there that I can talk about. So I hope some of you will tune in and enjoy that. But before I finish, there are two things that I would just like you to remember from today, because it was a great example. One is that just watch out for stories this week, because those stories could be the stories that help you do what Mike's trying to do, which is to change the world. I think it's absolutely critical that you think about that and capture those stories. Be an archaeologist of your own life. And as I think was beautifully demonstrated there, the key thing about storytelling is that it can act as an empathy engine. Thank you very much for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you next week for show 60. My name is Scott MacArthur, and this has been Artefact Live.